Bullies target the new kid, unaware he's a champion fighter. The hallways of Westlake High seemed to stretch endlessly before Eric Clark as he clutched his schedule tightly in his sweaty palm. At 15, he was of average height, with a slightly rounded middle that his mother called baby fat, and insisted he would grow out of eventually. His dark hair fell across his forehead in an untamed mop that partially obscured his deep brown eyes that darted nervously from classroom numbers to his wrinkled schedule and back again. It was his third day at Westlake, and Eric still felt like an alien who had landed on the wrong planet. The move from San Francisco to this suburban Midwest town had been abrupt following his father's job transfer. The cultural whiplash was still making his head spin. Just keep your head down, don't make eye contact, find room 203, get through the day, repeat tomorrow. This had become his mantra, a survival guide for navigating the complex social ecosystem of high school when you're the new kid. So far, it had worked, mostly. He'd managed to avoid any major confrontations, finding a quiet corner of the cafeteria where he could eat his lunch in peace while scrolling through his phone, pretending to be deeply engaged in something important rather than simply hiding. What nobody at Westlake knew, what nobody in this entire town knew, was that back in San Francisco, Eric had been a rising star in competitive mixed martial arts. For 6 years, he had trained religiously at his grandfather's dojo, earning his black belt in Taekwondo at 13 and competing in regional tournaments where he regularly demolished opponents. His grandfather, a former champion in his own right, had instilled in him not just technical skills but a philosophy. Fighting is always the last resort, Grandfather Clark would remind him during their training sessions. True strength is knowing when not to fight. Eric had taken this wisdom to heart, especially after an incident 2 years ago when he had broken another boy's arm during a tournament match. Accidentally, but the sickening crack and the boy's scream still haunted his dreams. After that, he had become more cautious, more controlled, more reluctant to engage at all. When they moved, Eric had made a private decision. This would be a fresh start. No one needed to know about his fighting background. He would just be normal Eric Clark, average student, invisible kid, not Eric the Dragon Clark, who had once been featured in a local martial arts magazine as one to watch. The warning bell rang, jolting Eric from his thoughts. As he quickened his pace, his shoulder collided with something solid. Someone solid. "Watch where you're going, Pudgy," came a deep voice, followed by a shove that sent Eric stumbling sideways into the lockers with a metallic clang. Eric looked up to see 3 boys, all seemingly carved from the same genetic material that produced high school athletes. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy confidence that came from knowing your place at the top of the social hierarchy. The one who had spoken and shoved stood in the center. He had close-cropped blonde hair and cold blue eyes that sized up Eric with dismissive amusement. "Sorry," Eric mumbled, immediately dropping his gaze and trying to step around them. "Sorry, that's it?" The blonde boy stepped into his path again. "I don't think I know you." "I'm new," Eric said simply, still avoiding eye contact. "I'm Jackson," the blonde boy said, putting a hand on his chest before gesturing to his companions. "This is Damon and Tyler. We're the welcoming committee." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And you are?" Eric Clark." "Ethan Chen," Jackson repeated, exaggerating each syllable. "Where are you from, Clark? You don't sound like you have an accent." "San Francisco," Eric replied, feeling his heart rate increase. Not from fear, but from the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before competition. His body recognized a threat before his mind had fully processed it. "Stay calm. Walk away. This isn't worth it." "San Francisco," Tyler, a redhead with freckles splashed across his nose, snickered. "That explains the—" He made a vague gesture toward Eric's midsection. "What's that supposed to mean?" The words escaped before Eric could stop them. Jackson's eyebrows rose slightly, seemingly pleased to have provoked a reaction. "It means we've got standards here at Westlake, fitness standards. Coach Phillips runs a tight ship in PE." He poked Eric's stomach with a finger. "You might want to lay off the dim sum, Clark." The muscle memory was instant. Eric's hand snapped up to grip Jackson's wrist, knocking it away from his body with enough force to make the bigger boy take a step back. For a fraction of a second, surprise flashed in Jackson's eyes, before hardening into something darker. Eric immediately released his grip mentally, kicking himself. "Stupid, now you've done it." "Sorry," he said quickly. "Reflex." Jackson rubbed his wrist, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a predator's smile. "Interesting reflex, Clark. Maybe you're not as soft as you look." He took a step back, nodding to his friends. "See you around." As they walked away, Eric heard Damon ask, We letting that slide? For now, Jackson replied, just loud enough for Eric to hear. For now. The final bell rang, and Eric realized he was now officially late for class. As he hurried down the emptying corridor, he couldn't shake the feeling that his keep-your-head-down strategy had just suffered a critical blow. The cafeteria at Westlake High was a cavernous space, with industrial beige walls and long tables that reminded Eric of prison scenes in movies. The cacophony of hundreds of teenage voices bounced off the hard surfaces, creating a wall of white noise that was oddly comforting. It made it easier to go unnoticed. At least that had been the case until today. Eric had just set his tray down at his usual isolated corner table when he sensed, rather than saw, someone approaching. He looked up to find Jackson sliding onto the bench across from him, flanked by Damon and Tyler, who remained standing, effectively blocking any escape route. "Mind if we join you?" Jackson asked, though he was already seated. "You shouldn't eat alone, new kid, not very sociable." Eric said nothing, his hand instinctively tightening around his fork. He forced himself to relax his grip. "So, San Francisco," Jackson continued conversationally, "what brings you to our humble town? Parents in witness protection? Running from the law?" He smirked. "My dad got transferred," Eric replied flatly. "Fascinating," Jackson said, clearly not fascinated at all. He reached across the table and plucked a fry from Eric's tray. "You don't mind sharing, right? That's what friends do." Before Eric could respond, Jackson's hand moved again, this time grabbing Eric's chocolate milk carton. He opened it and took a long drink before setting it back down, half empty. Throughout the cafeteria, Eric could feel eyes turning in their direction. This was a performance, he realized, a public demonstration of dominance. "He's testing you, don't react, it's just milk." "Thanks for the refreshment," Jackson said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You're very generous, Clark. I like that quality in my friends." "We're not friends," Eric said quietly. Jackson's smile disappeared. "What was that?" I said, "We're not friends." Eric met his gaze steadily now, something shifting inside him. Not anger, at least not yet, but a quiet determination. Boundaries needed to be set. Jackson exchanged glances with Damon and Tyler, a silent communication passing between them. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You know what happens to kids who don't want to be my friend, Clark? They find out how lonely this school can really be." He stood up. "Think about it. We'll continue this conversation later." As they walked away, Tyler casually reached out and knocked Eric's tray, sending his lunch sliding into his lap. Spaghetti sauce splattered across his white t-shirt like a crime scene. The cafeteria erupted in laughter as Eric sat there, sauce dripping from his shirt onto his jeans. He closed his eyes, counting his breaths the way his grandfather had taught him. 1, 2, 3, 4. When he opened his eyes, a girl was standing beside his table, offering him a handful of napkins. "Jackson West is a jerk," she said matter-of-factly. She had dark curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and glasses with purple frames. "I'm Maya, by the way." "Eric," he replied, taking the napkins with a grateful nod. "Thanks. New kid. Advice? The bathroom by the band room has a hand dryer that actually works well enough to dry clothes. And if you go out the side door near the science labs after lunch, you can avoid walking past Jackson's locker." She adjusted her glasses. "Not that I'm suggesting you should hide or anything." Eric managed a small smile. "Tactical retreat isn't the same as hiding." She returned the smile. "Exactly. Anyway, see you around, Eric." As Maya walked away, Eric felt a small ray of hope. Maybe he wasn't completely alone in this social wilderness after all. But as he made his way to the bathroom she'd recommended, spaghetti sauce cooling uncomfortably against his skin, he couldn't help but wonder how long he could maintain his policy of non-engagement. Jackson West was clearly not someone who would simply lose interest and move on to an easier target. This is just the beginning, Eric thought grimly as he tried to salvage his shirt under the hand dryer. And it's only going to get worse before it gets better. And over the next 2 weeks, Eric's prediction proved distressingly accurate. What had started as unpleasant encounters rapidly evolved into a deliberate campaign of harassment. It began with small things, shoulder checks in the hallway, books knocked from his hands, whispered comments just loud enough for him to hear, but it quickly escalated. His gym clothes mysteriously disappeared during PE, forcing him to participate in his regular clothes and earning him extra laps from Coach Phillips. Someone, though there was little mystery about who, had scrawled Kung Pao Chicken on his locker in permanent marker. Each day, Eric repeated his grandfather's mantra, "Fighting is always the last resort. True strength is knowing when not to fight." But his resolve was being tested more severely than he had ever anticipated. The physical discomfort he could handle. He'd taken harder hits in training than anything Jackson and his friends had dished out so far. It was the constant vigilance that was wearing him down, the knowledge that at any moment, from any direction, another attack might come. Maya had begun sitting with him at lunch, providing a buffer of sorts. Jackson seemed less inclined to make a scene when others were present, especially girls. She'd introduced Eric to her friend Raj, a lanky junior with a passion for robotics, who seemed genuinely unbothered by the social hierarchy that dominated Westlake. Jackson's dad is some big shot at the country club, Raj explained one day as they sat in the library during study hall, and his older brother was the quarterback who took Westlake to state championships 3 years ago. Jackson's been riding that legacy since freshman year. So he's royalty around here? Eric asked. More like he's desperate to live up to expectations, Maya said, looking up from her chemistry textbook. His brother's at Ohio State on a football scholarship now. Word is, Jackson's not nearly as talented, but his dad's been pushing him since he could walk. That doesn't excuse him being a jerk, Raj added. No, Maya agreed, but it explains a lot. Understanding Jackson's motivations didn't make Eric's situation any easier, however. If anything, Jackson's determination to assert his dominance seemed to intensify as days passed, as if he sensed Eric's restraint and interpreted it as weakness, a fatal mistake in the predator-prey dynamics of high school. The breaking point came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Eric had stayed late to make up a science quiz he'd missed the previous week. By the time he finished, the hallways were nearly empty, most students having already left for the day. As he approached his locker, he saw them waiting, Jackson, Damon, and Tyler, plus 2 other boys from the football team whose names he didn't know, 5 against 1. The odds made his stomach tighten, not with fear but with the grim recognition that this confrontation might be unavoidable. There he is, Jackson said, pushing off from the lockers where he'd been leaning. We've been waiting for you, Clark. Eric said nothing, stopping several feet away, assessing the situation with the clinical detachment his grandfather had taught him. 5 opponents, confined space, multiple potential weapons in the form of backpacks, possibly other objects. Limited escape routes. Nothing to say? Jackson took a step forward. You've been pretty quiet these past couple weeks. Very patient. What do you want, Jackson? Eric kept his voice neutral, betraying none of the calculations running through his mind. I want to know what your deal is, Jackson said, closing the distance between them. Nobody's this passive. Nobody just takes it the way you do. Are you scared? Are you just that pathetic? He was close enough now that Eric could smell the mint gum on his breath. Or are you hiding something? The question hit uncomfortably, close to the truth, and Eric felt his pulse quicken. Still, he remained silent. Jackson's face hardened. I asked you a question. I heard you, Eric replied. I just don't have an answer you'd understand. Something in his tone must have conveyed more defiance than he intended, because Jackson's expression darkened further. Without warning, he shoved Eric hard, sending him stumbling back against the lockers. Try me, Jackson growled. Eric straightened up slowly, feeling a familiar calm settling over him, the same focused state he entered before competitions. I don't want trouble. Too late for that, Jackson said, and nodded to the others. They moved with surprising coordination, surrounding Eric in a loose semicircle. Damon and Tyler grabbed his arms, pinning them against the lockers. Eric allowed it to happen, still hoping he could defuse the situation without revealing what he was capable of. Jackson stepped forward again, now mere inches from Eric's face. I've decided I don't like you, Clark. Something about you just bothers me. He smiled unpleasantly. I think it's time we properly welcomed you to Westlake. The first punch caught Eric in the stomach, driving the air from his lungs in a painful whoosh. He doubled over as much as Damon and Tyler's grip would allow, gasping. Not so tough now, are you? Jackson taunted, winding up for another blow. Time seemed to slow down as Eric made his decision. 6 weeks of restraint, of turning the other cheek, of walking away, and this was where it had led him, pinned against lockers in an empty hallway, about to be used as a punching bag by 5 boys who mistook his restraint for weakness. Fighting is always the last resort. As Jackson's fist came toward him again, Eric moved. In one fluid motion, he dropped his weight, breaking the grip Damon and Tyler had on his arms. He twisted sideways, causing Jackson's punch to miss his face and instead connect with the metal locker with a painful clang. Jackson howled, clutching his hand. Eric was already moving, using the momentum of his drop to sweep his leg in a wide arc that caught Tyler at the ankles, sending him crashing to the floor. Damon lunged forward, but Eric was faster, stepping inside the larger boy's reach, and delivering 2 rapid strikes to his solar plexus that left him gasping and staggering backward. The 2 football players Eric didn't know exchanged uncertain glances before both rushing him at once. Eric pivoted between them, using their own momentum to send them colliding into each other. One went down, the other kept his balance and turned to face Eric with newfound wariness. Jackson, still cradling his injured hand, stared at Eric with a mixture of shock and rage. What the hell? Eric settled into a fighting stance, his breathing controlled, his movements economical. I told you I didn't want trouble. Tyler was back on his feet now, moving to flank Eric while the remaining football player circled in the other direction. Damon was still trying to catch his breath, but had managed to straighten up, his face contorted with anger. "Get him," Jackson ordered, but there was a new note of uncertainty in his voice. They rushed Eric simultaneously from 3 directions. To the casual observer, what happened next would have appeared as a blur of motion, but to Eric each movement was precisely calculated, each strike and block executed with the precision that came from thousands of hours of practice. He ducked under Tyler's wild swing, used the football player's extended arm as leverage to flip him over his shoulder, then spun to block Damon's attempt to grab him from behind. A quick series of strikes, none powerful enough to cause serious damage but strategically placed to incapacitate, and Damon was on his knees, clutching his midsection. The remaining football player backed away, hands raised. "Dude, I'm out," he said, looking at Jackson. "You didn't say he was some kind of ninja." Jackson stood frozen, cradling his injured hand as Tyler groaned on the floor and Damon struggled to regain his feet. "What? Who are you?" Jackson demanded, his earlier confidence evaporated. Eric relaxed his stance slightly, but remained alert. "Just the new kid," he said quietly, "the one who's been trying to avoid this exact situation for weeks." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, and moments later, Coach Phillips appeared, his face darkening as he took in the scene. "What the hell is going on here?" he bellowed, his gaze sweeping from the boys on the floor to Jackson's clearly injured hand, and finally to Eric, who alone remained standing and apparently unharmed. "Clark went crazy," Jackson began, but his voice lacked conviction. "He attacked us for no reason." Coach Phillips's eyebrows rose as he looked at Eric, who despite his slight frame and unassuming appearance, showed no signs of having been on the losing end of a 5-against-1 confrontation. "Is that right, Clark?" Phillips asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Eric met his gaze steadily. "They were waiting for me when I came out of Mr. Brennan's room. They pinned me against the lockers. I defended myself." Phillips studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All of you, principal's office, now." As they made their way down the hallway, Jackson kept shooting glances at Eric, a mixture of anger and confusion on his face. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably, and everyone knew it. "True strength is knowing when not to fight," Eric reminded himself. But sometimes knowing when to fight was equally important. Word spread through Westlake High like wildfire. By the time Eric arrived at school the next morning, the story had grown to mythic proportions. Depending on who was telling it, he had either knocked out all 5 boys with a single roundhouse kick or performed moves that defied the laws of physics. The reality, as Principal Mercer had determined after reviewing the security camera footage and taking statements, was damning enough for Jackson and his friends. They had received 2 weeks of in-school suspension and were banned from participating in the upcoming football game. Eric, deemed to have acted in self-defense, though Mercer had cautioned him about excessive force, had been given only a stern warning. As Eric walked through the hallways, he noticed the difference immediately. Students who had previously looked through him as if he were invisible now watched him pass with undisguised curiosity. Some nodded in acknowledgement. Others quickly averted their gaze when he looked their way. "There he is, the Kung Fu master. Himself." Raj appeared beside him, grinning broadly. "Dude, you're a legend now. Why didn't you tell us you were basically Bruce Lee?" "It's not Kung Fu," Eric corrected automatically. "And I'm not a legend, I just defended myself. Against 5 guys," Maya added, joining them from the other direction. 5 guys who've been terrorizing half the school for years." She studied him with new interest. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Eric sighed, realizing that his cover was irreparably blown. "My grandfather's dojo in San Francisco. I've been training since I was 9. "And you just, what?" "Decided to keep that a secret?" Raj asked. Eric shrugged. "After the incident in the hallway 2 years ago back home, I wanted a fresh start. To be normal." "Normal is overrated," Maya declared. "And besides, from what I hear, you didn't seriously hurt any of them. You just neutralized the threat." She smiled. "Very zen of you." Despite himself, Eric laughed. It felt good, a release. of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. My grandfather would approve of that assessment. As they approached Eric's locker, he stopped short. The Kung Pao chicken graffiti had been scrubbed away, and in its place was a crudely drawn but recognizable dragon. "I did that," a voice said from behind them. They turned to find a freshman girl Eric recognized vaguely from his English class. "I'm not much of an artist, but I thought it was better than what was there before." "Thanks," Eric said, genuinely touched. "It looks great." She blushed and hurried away, but the encounter left Eric thoughtful. "You know what this means, right?" Raj said as they continued toward their first class. "You're going to have to start a self-defense club or something. The demand will be through the roof." "I don't know about that," Eric began. "Actually, it's not a bad idea," Maya interjected. "Not for the fame or whatever, but because it would be genuinely useful. Not everyone can do what you did, but everyone should be able to protect themselves." At a basic level, Eric considered this. His grandfather had always emphasized that martial arts was as much about discipline and self-improvement as it was about fighting technique. Maybe there was a way to honor those teachings here, in this new chapter of his life. "I'll think about it," he promised. As days passed, the ripple effects of the hallway incident continued to spread. Jackson and his friends, when they returned from their suspension, were noticeably subdued. They still traveled in a pack, but they gave Eric a wide berth in the hallways. Their previous swagger diminished. Eric had expected resentment, perhaps even escalation. Jackson didn't strike him as someone who would simply accept defeat and move on. But when they finally came face to face in the cafeteria, a week after the suspension ended, what he saw in Jackson's eyes wasn't hatred, but something more complex. Jackson had approached alone, separating himself from his usual group who watched nervously from across the room. "Can I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty seat across from Eric. After a moment's hesitation, Eric nodded. Jackson sat, fidgeting with the wrapper of his sandwich before speaking. "My dad was pretty pissed about the suspension," he said finally. "And even more pissed when coach benched me for the game." Eric waited, unsure where this was going. "Look," Jackson continued, "I'm not good at this apology thing, but what I did, it wasn't cool." He met Eric's gaze directly. "I was being a jerk." "Yeah, you were," Eric agreed, but without malice. A ghost of a smile crossed Jackson's face. "Direct. I respect that." He paused. "Anyway, I heard you might be starting some kind of martial arts club or whatever. I was wondering, if you're open to it, I might want to check that out." Of all the scenarios Eric had imagined for this conversation, this request hadn't even made the list. He studied Jackson's face, looking for any sign of insincerity or hidden agenda, but found only uncomfortable vulnerability. "It's just a rumor so far," Eric said carefully. "But if it happens, yeah, you'd be welcome, as long as you understand what it's really about." "Which is not fighting," Eric said. "At least not primarily. It's about discipline, respect, control." He smiled slightly. "All the things my grandfather drilled into me that kept me from seriously hurting you guys that day." Jackson winced, but nodded. "I get it, or I want to anyway." He stood up. "Just think about it, okay?" As Jackson walked away, Maya slipped into the seat he had vacated, her expression incredulous. "Did I just witness Jackson West asking to join your non-existent martial arts club?" she asked. "The same Jackson West who was calling you Kung Ki Pao Chicken a few weeks ago." "People can surprise you," Eric said, realizing as he spoke that he truly believed it. "Sometimes all they need is a reason to be better than they've been." Maya shook her head in amazement. "Well, if you can turn Jackson West into a decent human being, that might be more impressive than taking down 5 guys at once." Eric laughed. "I wouldn't go that far, but maybe this is what my grandfather meant about true strength." He looked around the cafeteria, at the students going about their day, at Jackson rejoining his friends across the room, at Raj approaching their table with his lunch tray balanced precariously in one hand. For the first time since arriving at Westlake, Eric felt a sense of belonging, not because he had proven his physical prowess, but because he had finally found the courage to be his authentic self. The path forward wouldn't be perfect, high school rarely was, but it would be genuine. And that, Eric decided, was victory enough.